My name is Cummings Koski, and I reached financial independence at 46. And I retired early at 49. My exact retirement date, I've probably been telling everybody here, but it's December 6, 2019. And I call it my new birthday. Now, before we get started, I just want to say how tired I am about the topic of money being so taboo. I mean, we're so uncomfortable talking about it. It's like if someone asked you what your salary was, would you tell them? If someone asked you how much debt you had, would you share it with them? And what about little things like how much you pay for health insurance or internet? We're just so uncomfortable talking about it. And so today I want to throw the taboo of talking about money out the window. And I'm going to be real vulnerable with you today, and I'm going to be unveiling my numbers behind firing. Is that okay? Okay. But it's all in the spirit of normalizing conversations around money. So for the longest, I didn't even think you could retire this early. I mean, Social Security said you have to be 62, right? And the IRS says you need to be 59 and a half or else they'll penalize you for taking this money out. And then 55, most of our companies won't even let us retire before then and get the full benefits. I mean, I would even go onto my company's 401 website and that little slider bar where you can change your age, it wouldn't go under 55. So I decided for myself that I was going to retire in my 40s. And I call it firing. And that cute little candy bar in the middle, my daughter designed that for my retirement party. And she actually coined the term firing. And of course, like any good mom, I stole it from her. Okay, this is me and my daughter. I am fired 2019. Let me just tell you a little bit more about myself. Again, I retired at 49. Can you tell I'm real proud of that? So I worked for a global data company right here in Ohio for 20 years. I was in sales. I'm an African-American single mom. I have one adult daughter. And when I was working, I was making less than six figures. And this is the adult daughter way back in the day when I don't even think she was a year old, and I was in my 20s, so that was in 96. So a little bit more about my numbers. So this is the juicy part, but I really want to unveil these numbers because I'm just, again, so tired of the taboo of talking about them. So let's look at my salary. I made about $80,000 a year, and that was the average over the last 10 years when I was working. I'm in sales, so about 60% of that was my base salary, and 40% was these variable commissions. So my paycheck would fluctuate a little bit. I did about $2,000 worth of side hustles and different things that brought in a little extra money. I still have a little bit of debt. I opted not to pay off my mortgage going into retirement, but that's just me. Some people do not want to go into retirement having debt, but for my mortgage, the interest rate was so low, I decided not to. And that money's still working in the market. Although the last 2 weeks, I'm questioning that decision. My expenses are about $45,000, give or take. Again, sometimes I have a good year. I would say on the low end, over the last 10 years, I made about $65,000. On the high end, maybe $95,000. And my fine number is the standard 25 times my expenses. And I wasn't quite ready to retire that soon or as soon as I hit the fine number. So I waited till I got to about 30 times my expenses, and that's when I was ready to pull the trigger and retire early. Now, what about my savings and investing? This is a big piece of it. My savings rate was about 40%. So a lot of times you hear people saving 50, 60, 70%. I didn't have a super high savings rate, but I made $80,000 a year. And depending on who you ask, that might be good, it might be bad. I maxed out my 401k, but also got a company match. Now, this is an interesting piece because some people don't include the company match in their savings rate, which is cool. I think I originally did not, but I learned that the financial planning industry, they do include the company match. So my company was very generous. I have to give them credit for that. If I put in 7%, they put in 9%. So that helped kind of fast forward my path there. The next thing is I maxed out my Roth IRA, and I maxed out that health savings account, and I did the family max. The family was me and my daughter. All you need is you and one other person. And then about $2,000 in taxable savings. By then, I had saved enough, I didn't have a whole lot left in my paycheck after that, right? So let's take a look at what my pay statements actually look like. I figure what better place to do it than at a big conference, on a big stage, in front of a bunch of people, okay? So let's just look at it. What the hell? Okay. My take-home pay was only about 36%. Now remember, my compensation can be variable, so it may not have looked exactly like this, but most paychecks were like this, and this is every other week. The biggest chunk was what I was contributing to my pre-tax deductions, and we'll dive into that in just a moment. But this last piece, you gotta count. It's like no pay statement is complete without taxes, and that was about 15%. So let's dive into these pre-tax deductions. Again, they lower your taxable income, so that's why my tax is probably a little bit less. But the first part is pretty small. It's just my health insurance and my dental insurance. Now, this is the one thing I will really miss about working for corporate America: dirt cheap health insurance. I'll probably never see that again. But so that's part of the deduction. But the other ones are going to me. So the health insurance, that's sunk cost. That's done. That's going to the insurance company. So my health savings account, that was about $270. And then by far the biggest piece was my 401k. And for most people, their biggest pot of money is going to be your 401k. It's just easy, it's automatic. More than likely, your company made you start it when you first started with the company. So for most people, that is going to be the biggest part. And for me, it was as well. Now, my net worth breakdown. So again, because I was shoveling so much in that 401k, when I finally look at my net worth, it equated to about half of my total net worth. Now, the next one here is a traditional IRA, and this was a rollover from a 401k. When I got divorced, they split it up. So I'm pretty proud of that piece, mainly because it started out at $60,000 when I got divorced, and this was about close to 15 years ago, and now that's worth, again, exclude the last 2 weeks, but it's worth about $190,000, so I was pretty happy about that. And then there's that health savings account. The high water mark for that was about $140,000, and that just came from maxing it out year after year, rolling it over, and investing it. And these other ones are pretty small, but there's a couple things I wanted to point out. Some people don't include their vehicle in their net worth, which is fine. I like to see everything. And some people don't even include their home, but I like to see everything. Okay, so obviously that did not happen overnight. So if you really want to do a powerful activity with your finances, start your net worth, because that's a full picture of everything you got going on. So when I sat down to do this the first time, I started in 2013, and I was almost halfway to my FI number. So I felt pretty darn good. So I hit my FI number in November of 2017. That was 25 times my expenses. Held tight for a couple of years, and then I retired early on December 6, 2019. So the thing is, it wasn't an easy path, and it actually was a pretty bumpy road for me. So that's why I do like to share my story and talk openly about money and my finances, because I feel like you can learn so much from other people's mistakes, and to know that they didn't go a straight line. They hit the same type of bumps in the road like you did. So I went through a lot of failures, mistakes, setbacks, And I just did a lot of flailing around for a long time. I mean, I really didn't kick it into gear until I was in my late 30s. So let's take a look at what that timeline looked like. And anyone's timeline starts at the same place, right? Your childhood and how you grew up. And I call this part mindset over adversities, because I had a lot of adversities when I was young. So the first part was, growing up. I grew up in a small town in South Carolina where they just had 2-lane highways. And I was raised by a single dad with 6 kids. And he worked his butt off. I still don't know how he did it. And I just remember he always had 2 jobs. He had his main job, which was like at a textile company down in the South. They were big back then. And then he had a part-time job working at like a construction company. And we call that a side hustle now. And when I was a senior in high school, he got cancer. And I just remember, I'm not sure how I found out that he got it, but he was one of those guys that never went to the doctor. And so I knew something dramatic had to have happened for him to either go to the hospital or go to the doctor. And I was told that he had brain cancer. And I later found out that he had colon cancer, which we know is very curable now, but it progressed and it spread to his brain and other parts of his body. So it was so hard to watch this strong, hardworking dad go from that to having to lean on one of my sisters to take him to the bathroom because his legs had gotten too weak. So that was very tough, and as you guessed it, he passed away of cancer. Actually, it was March of that year. And 3 months later, I graduated from high school, May of that year. So he never got to see me graduate. But I have a lot of great memories of him, and it's been a long time. So I'm finally to the point where I don't burst out in tears when I talk about it. But, I just learned so much from him, and it made such a huge difference because actually at the age that he died, he was 49. And I feel like that's when I really kind of started my new life, right? So I still continued my plans to go off to college. Didn't get rich going to college. I was still a poor college kid. And I did the only thing I knew how to do, which was to work for what you have. So I got a little bit of scholarship money. I got a little bit of grant money. And then I worked for the rest. I worked 2 jobs, just like my dad. And I took a full load at school as well, because I was trying to do what everybody else was doing, except I was working in addition to that. So obviously, I wasn't able to devote the time to my studies like I wanted to, and I did really crappy in school, but I did graduate. I don't know what the lowest GPA was to graduate, but that was mine. So I got done with school, and then I started my career after that. I got married, yay, and I had my daughter. So life was great. These were some beautiful moments. I was married for 10 years. Everything's coming up roses and the sunshine is out. And then I got divorced right around 36, 37, and I became a single mom. So that changed things quite a bit. What I thought was going to be a partner journey, that I had a partner helping me out, now I had to do on my own. So that scared me. And I just remember the biggest financial pivot point I remember from that divorce was that my husband and I both made about the same money, and we got about the same company match to our 401k. And when I looked at my 401k, I had $20,000. I'm like, yay, that's great, right? I'm like 36, I got $20,000. And my husband, he had $120,000. So he had $100,000 more than I did in his 401k. Now, of course, I asked myself a bunch of questions trying to figure that out. I never really did, but I vowed to myself that I would never, ever let that happen again and feel so financially ignorant. So I decided to educate myself about money and personal finance and investing. And I finally just started waking up. Now, this next section I call money moves. because I finally started taking action. And this felt so good to me because I could see things moving. I could see progress. So I started maxing out my 401k at work, my IRA, and my health savings account. Now, look, I'm 39 years old here. People are retiring early at 39, and I'm just starting over. So I'm feeling a little bit behind already, and maybe that was what kind of pushed me forward so hard, the fact that I felt like I was a little bit behind and I was starting over and everybody was like way over there. So at 46, I hit my FI number, 25 times my expenses. I wouldn't really even know that had I not sat down and done my net worth statement and started looking at my numbers. So even if you think you're not in the greatest place, it is so cool to just start, even if you're in the red, because when you start to look back and it's in the rearview mirror, it's going to make you feel real good that you moved the needle. Now, I just was not ready to do it just because I hit 25 times my expenses. I gave myself a couple more years, but I didn't just twiddle my thumbs. I thought about, what does life look like to me after I fire? And I started designing that life. So I handed in my fire letter, I had the big party, and I retired early. But before I set all that into motion, I had to write the obligatory letter of resignation. Now, I knew I had to do this, and I thought about it a million times. For me, it was this huge monumental moment. It wasn't just an I quit letter. Like, this was going to change the whole trajectory of my life. So it was a big, big deal. I wrote it, rewrote it, and wrote it again, but I finally called it finished. Would you guys like to see the letter? Okay. All right, let's see the letter. Now, I managed to get it down to one page. Okay, so that was a win. Now, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I will pull out a few things. So, of course, I start out saying, thank you to the company and my boss, and then I sprung it on them. I said, I know my 40s is a little early to be retiring. Ha-ha. And some may even say, I'm giving away the golden ticket. Now, I've spent many months, maybe even years, imagining such a divergence from the norm. But I ultimately came to one conclusion, and that was I could either follow a traditional path or blaze my own, and I chose the latter. So that was that. I was ready to move on. I wanted to share this growing the gap concept very quickly because that is so important, okay? The green arrow, that's what you want to do more of. That's what you want to increase. And then the red is that's what you want to decrease. So you want to minimize your debt, your taxes, and your expenses. Now, as far as expenses, I'm not the cut out the latte girl, okay? I enjoy a latte every now and then. I like to drive a luxury car and all that. So you have to decide what expenses don't even matter to you and what makes you happy. Hitting the big three is probably a good start. So that red arrow, you want to push those things down. So if this is the gap, you're increasing it by pushing those things down. The next part is the things that you want to increase, the things I actually like to focus more of my time on. Your earnings, your savings, and your investing. Now, I want to give an example of savings and investing, but the earnings part is pretty interesting too because you might want to do that at work. You're getting promotions, you're working overtime, or you might have a good side hustle, or you might be great with real estate. Now, for savings, the way that I started saving was when I was in high school, I got a $2 bill. And when I got that $2 bill, I thought it was special or lucky, and I just held on to it. So all through high school, every time I went to the bank, and back then we went to the bank, that's how we could cash our check, but I would ask for a $2 bill. So when I got that $2 bill, I would hold on to it, and I kept collecting them even when I was growing up in poverty or poor college kid on through adulthood. And by the time, I would say about 10 years ago, I finally decided to count those $2 bills. And I had 1,800 $2 bills, which meant that was $3,600. And they're still lucky to me today. See, I got my $2 bills with me, right? So what I learned from that, ever since I was a high school kid, that no matter how small it is, that saving is so important because you're exercising that muscle. You're creating the habit. So even if you're in debt and you have big expenses, just save a little something just as an exercise to create that habit. Because when you make more money, you will still have that habit, and it'll be easy at that point because you've already been practicing all this time. Now, this is my favorite example. I do a lot of financial literacy classes at high schools and colleges, and I always want them to know how important it is that they have time on their side. And I show this slide to them about compound growth. And the example I use is $50. If you save $50 a week for 40 years, you're invested in the stock market, you get about 9%, you will be a millionaire. You'll have $1 million. Now, I get asked a lot, what should I give my kid for, like, graduation? I don't want to give her some consumerist gift or something like that. So here's what I give all of the friends, family that I know for graduation. I give them a crisp new $50 bill. I go to the bank, I make sure it's crisp and brand new. I want it to look special. And I put in this note about compound growth. I tell them, you're my millionaire. All you have to do is save $50 a week, and you can get to $1 million. And to me, this is like literally the gift that keeps on giving. Because one, you've given them cash, that's what they all want. And then two, you're giving them the gift of knowledge. And this little thing is going to be something to stick with them. And on the back of this card, I created a schedule that shows every year how this grows. And they think it's so cool. So I just kept doing it. Now, I'm part of the FIRE community, and we always want to look at how we can optimize things. So what if you could cut that time in half? 20 years instead of 40. Now, obviously, you're going to have to save more than $50 a week, right? Anybody know how much you need to save to get here in 20 years? Yell out some numbers. It's $350 a week. So that's a little bit more, but look at the annual amount, $18,000. That's less than your 401k max. And that's not even including your employer match. So for most people, the average household income in America is about $60,000. So if you wanted to put a savings rate to that, that would only be a 30% savings rate to save this to get to $1 million. And it's worth kind of showing those side by side. The 40 years or their FIRE way and getting there in 20 years. Your choice. So we talk a lot about the best path to wealth or to financial independence. And I really like to make this very, very simple. Just choose what lights you up the most. For instance, I really don't like real estate, but I know some people are crushing it with real estate. That's great. Just find what lights you up the most. But I've found 3 primary ways, and that's the stock market, real estate, and entrepreneurship. Those are the 3 primary ways, or some subset of those. Now, what's your superpower? We all have a superpower. For instance, is minimalism your superpower? The minimalist would love this slide. It's so clean and neat and nice, right? Or is your superpower house hacking or military benefits or any of these other 8,000 things that we hear people talk about? You obviously can't be good at everything. And if you try to, you're probably going to fail a lot. And your mind is just going to get cluttered, just like this screen. You're not going to be able to focus on what's really important, the things that you're good at, that are your superpower to help move you forward. So for me, think about yours. I just came up with a nice, clean list of the things I knew I was good at. And that's what I worked so hard on. And I brushed away everything else. So for me, low cost of living, company benefits, all of these items. So think about what you're really good at and focus on that. You don't have to be all things to everybody, but we all have superpowers. Now, the evolution of diversity in the FIRE community. I've been very encouraged by this. And, we've all seen and heard the stereotypes. In the very beginning, I think maybe 6 or 7 years ago is when I discovered FIRE. It was mostly, white males that was making a very high income, over 6 figures. Now, obviously, I'm not that. But I do want to give them credit. I learned plenty from them. I didn't have to be a white male to take away something that they had to say. But certainly, it brought me value to see other voices with other experiences, other cultures, different backgrounds, different sex, all kinds of different things. So just over the last few years, I have seen a huge shift to listening to different voices. So many great content creators, podcasters, bloggers, YouTubers, and even the way that you receive this information. Like, I wish I learned in school that I learned better by listening, because I was always encouraged to read this book, read that book. I'm really not a reader like that. So going to YouTube and listening to podcasts, that was my thing. And I just love how all these different voices have come into play, and now it's such a diverse group of people, almost as diverse as the world at large. And just look at who put on this conference today. Diana has rocked it. Like, I'm so proud of her, right? That she brought this together almost as a one-woman show. And she was a ninja in rehearsal yesterday. Like, but she is amazing, and I am just completely blown away that she pulled this together the way that she did, almost as a one-woman show. So kudos to her. And again, she is a single woman that is a badass. Now, People Magazine writes my headline this way, After Fire. I called AF After Fire. And they would have you think I have it all figured out. I really don't. So I just want to finish up by just sharing some of the questions I still had about after I retired, after I decided I wanted to fire. So after firing, my first thing was, where is my paycheck? So I'm not getting that automatic, payroll going into my bank, that automatic draft. So I had to create my own. And that's basically using the 4% rule of thumb. And I say of thumb because some people think it should be 3%, 3.5%, whatever. But I had to decide what investments I wanted to pull from and make sure it got into my checking account to pay my bills. And the way the 4% works is you remove 4% every year off of your nest egg, and that should essentially last you forever. Now, that's really assuming that you have, and the way I did it at least, that there was no other income, okay? You saw I had a little bit of side hustle that will continue. One thing we underestimate is retiring so young, you have that human capital. If it doesn't work out, let's go back to work like everybody else. It's not the end of the world. So the second thing I had was that question, like I said, for the longest, I did not even realize that it was possible to retire early because I always thought the number was 59 and a half. So that's a big question that people always ask, and I asked it myself. How do I get my money out without paying a penalty? And there were so many ways. The main thing I used was my Roth that I'll be using because it happened so recently, right? December 6, 2019. So mostly Roth contributions. So contributions to your Roth, you can take out anytime you want. No penalty and no tax. And there's a whole bunch of other ways. My health savings account, no age limit connected to that at all. I don't even have to have earned income to contribute to my health savings account if I want to. And then there's after-tax investments, and I'll just list all of these, but you know what? I was just so encouraged that I could come up with 7 of these just off the top of my head. Now, some of these are a little more complicated, but they are well written about in the FIRE community. And the traditional financial planning industry doesn't really focus on some of these very much because we're so young. We're like, this anomaly. So that's why community is so important, because we can learn from each other. In the healthcare breakout, even though I was, quote, leading it and helping Lynn lead it, I learned so much from the people that were there. So that's what community is about. You're learning from each other. And my last question was the big one, health insurance. This one is really tough, and it's probably the number one reason why people decide not to pull the trigger on retiring early. It's nasty, and healthcare in the U.S. is ridiculous, okay? But it's still, it's still figure-outable. We can still figure out how to work through the system for us. So I'm going to show you the first three that I considered. COBRA was way too expensive because I no longer got that great company subsidy. The Affordable Care Act was a great option. Ohio has a pretty decent exchange. And then I'm pursuing my master's degree, so I'm attending a university, and I thought, okay, they got a really low-risk pool, young, healthy people. Maybe I'll look at that. And I'll show you these last ones. They're options. They're not options that really fit for me. I mean, especially the working or moving to another country. But the FIRE community talks extensively about all of these. There's a FI healthcare website that Lynn was talking about that she leads. It's just an aggregation of everyone's input to say, this is hard to figure out, so let's help each other. So I chose the Affordable Care Act. The state of Ohio actually has a very good exchange. In my county, I had 45 different plans to choose from, but that is very state-specific and to an extent, very county-specific. So it's worth digging into. Now, this last one, after firing, my big audacious goal is I just want to one day create a financially literate society. And I believe retiring early has cleared the path for me to do just that. Now, my question to you is, when are you firing? I have a feeling that a lot of you in this room is ready to start your countdown. Thank you.